Hey, Brian Boyle here, and welcome to episode 183 of The Mesh Tongue, where I'm going to talk to you today about the difference between hypertraining and overtraining. I'll talk to you about that when I get right back. So, welcome back to episode 183 of The Mesh Tongue. It's been a little while, but good to be back here with you. Episode 183 is about hypertraining versus overtraining. Now, this concept was, I think, first introduced from hypertraining with Dr. Jack Daniels and the Daniels running formula. Now, if you've looked at the previous episodes, I talked about the Daniels running formula. I think if you haven't already added that book to your bookshelf, I think you're really missing out on something. So that's the key, right? Okay, you got to have the book. I think it's in the 3rd edition now. Just keeps getting better and better. Hypertraining versus overtraining. What are the differences? Now, Dr. Daniels talks about hypertraining in the form of almost similar to hyperventilation, taking too much of something in. Okay, that could be good for you in the form of oxygen, right? So if you're like, you're taking too much oxygen in or more than would be needed. Now, overtraining is when you take the training and you push it to the fatigue, the stress-induced injuries, so stress fractures, stress reactions, plantar fasciitis, the Achilles tendonitis can also be kind of forms of that IT band syndrome. These overuse symptoms. When we say overuse, it means usually overtraining. But fatigue, okay, so from early, resting heart rate, you take your heart rate first thing in the morning and it's usually like 56 and now all of a sudden it's 85. Okay, and it's like that consistently for a couple of days. It could be signs of overtraining. Heavy, dead legs are another symptom of overtraining. Okay, or this kind of going towards the bad end of training. Hypertraining, on the other hand, is according to Dr. Daniels, is where basically you're not at that overtrained thing just yet, but maybe let's take an example. Okay, so you now run 50 miles a week. And you do your, this is a bump from the 30 miles a week previously. You do a time trial and your times are no faster than they were when you were running 30 miles a week. This would be a classic case of hyper training. So Dr. Daniels says, you know what, you're not getting an increase in results with an increase in training, probably a couple things you want to do. So he has 4 different things. One of them being that you would reduce the mileage of threshold training, interval training, and or kind of race pace training. Okay, and so if we think about that, you'd reduce them anywhere between 10 to 6%. Okay, so if you're saying, hey, you know what, my interval training that I'm doing on a weekly basis, reduce it by about 10%. Okay, so maybe, get it back, instead of saying, hey, you know what, I'm doing, 10 reps of, 400s or quarters, I'm going to do 9. Okay, and see if that makes a difference. Okay, so 1 less rep. It could be that, the threshold training, okay, again, instead of going, for 5 or 6 miles, okay, you're only going to go for 4 miles, all right, so, or 4.5. So the goal is not to just throw the baby out with the bathwater, just throw everything away and just say, well, it's not working, this isn't worth it, okay. What we want to do is reduce the training capacity by no more than about 10%. The next thing is that, maybe that you reduce the training altogether. You get rid of the interval training, threshold, and race pace for a week or 2. Just kind of go out and just say, hey, I'm just going to do some long, steady or long, slow distance. Get the mileage in, but not necessarily increase the training capacity. Again, we're thinking intervals, race, or threshold. And again, the reality of it is it's sort of like if you had an injury or cold. Sometimes you're going to cut that stuff out anyway. The next thing that you could do is, reduce the weekly mileage, right? So maybe you take the mileage and you reduce it back, 10%. All right, so that you say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to go back to the 50 miles this next week. Maybe I'm going to cut it back to 40 miles, all right? And see how things are. Because the reality of it is again, if this is hypertraining, if you're taking in too much of a good thing and you're not seeing an increase in benefit, chances are your body's just not used to it or ready for it. Right? So that's the key. You got to get used to it. You got to have ready, be ready for this type of training. Last but not least is basically once you've done this, okay, if you've tried all this stuff, is maybe you just say, hey, I took the 2 weeks off, and then you go back to what you were doing, okay, and see if in another 3 to 4 weeks, see if your training has kind of caught up, if your body's kind of got used to it, and now all of a sudden you're ready. So you go out and do a time trial, and maybe it's a 5K time trial, maybe it's a 1 mile on the track, or or 3,000 on the track, and you say, hey, you know what, okay, I should see that there's a progression. I should be improving on my times. And if you go back, you do the same thing that you did 2 or 3 weeks previously, you go through that same cycle in the macro cycle, and you say, yep, I did it. Okay, now all of a sudden my times have improved, then perfect. And if not, you may need to repeat that, or we may need to kind of take a look at and see what's going on. There may be something else going on, underlying. It could be nutrition, it could be hydration, it could be you're not getting enough sleep. There's a number of other variables, but that's kind of the deal and the difference between hypertraining and overtraining. So, if you've got any questions, you can send them my way. Brian, Brian, at company5k.com. That's the number 5k.com. Please share this with your friends and family. I appreciate that. Also your training partners. I appreciate the love, support that you've been giving me. I appreciate the fact that you're getting some fantastic information. The emails that you're sending, keep those coming in. Just because I haven't been putting out videos doesn't mean that I'm not talking to a lot of you off air. And you can also check out Anchor FM, Anchor.fm. There's an app that I've got kind of a daily FM radio show that we've got going now. And if you do need anything, I'll be here for you. Just don't go hurting yourself to come back. I'll see you again next time. Brian Boyle here. Take care.